Walter Davis stands motionless at his study window, a crumpled medical report trembling in his weathered architect's hands. Afternoon sunlight catches the tears sliding down his hollow cheeks, casting prism patterns on the mansion floor. He laid himself. 6 months to live. The words blur through his tears. From the hallway, his wife Eleanor's laughter filters through the door, her casual words slicing deeper than any cancer. "That fat man disgusts me. Once he's gone, all this will be ours." 40 years of marriage crystallizes into betrayal in an instant. Have you ever discovered a lifetime of trust was built on lies? Share your moment of revelation below. Like if this story touches your heart, follow to see how Walter rebuilds purpose from betrayal's ashes. The grandfather clock Walter restored on their 10th anniversary ticks relentlessly in the silence, counting down moments of a life suddenly redefined. His gaze shifts to the mansion beyond, the masterpiece he built with his own hands, now a monument to deception. Walter Davis stood motionless outside his study door, the afternoon sunlight catching on his wedding band as Eleanor's voice drifted through the gap. "That fat man disgusts me," she laughed, the casual cruelty in her tone freezing him in place. Just a matter of time now. He backed away silently, decades of moving through construction sites having taught him which floorboards would betray his presence. His heart hammered against his ribs as he retreated to his private study, the sanctuary he'd designed himself when building their mansion 40 years ago. The door closed with a soft click that seemed to echo his suddenly fragile world. With trembling hands, he arranged the pill bottles from this morning's oncologist appointment in a perfect line on his mahogany desk. 6 months at most, the doctor had said. The words blurred as tears threatened, but Walter blinked them back. An architect learned precision, control, even now. His gaze drifted to the silver-framed photo of their mansion housewarming. Eleanor beaming beside him, his arm around her waist, his frame robust and healthy. His fingers traced his much younger face through the glass. "She couldn't have meant me," he whispered, voice cracking on the final word. But even as he spoke, memories surfaced. Eleanor's recent distance, her flinch when he reached for her hand last week, the new clothes, the whispered phone calls. The grandfather clock he'd restored on their 10th anniversary ticked relentlessly in the silence, marking time he suddenly realized might be measured differently by his wife of 40 years. A single tear escaped, landing on the photo's glass, distorting Eleanor's smile into something unrecognizable. Walter's mind, trained to see patterns in blueprints, began connecting dots he'd previously dismissed. His hand moved to his chest, where pain bloomed, not from the cancer the doctors had found, but from something deeper, more fundamental. He reached for the stack of medical paperwork, financial plans he'd meticulously arranged to ensure Eleanor would be comfortable after he was gone. The irony tasted bitter. His eye caught Eleanor's appointment book on their shared desk, open to today's date. Tuesday charity lunch, it read in her elegant handwriting, but he distinctly remembered her mentioning visiting her sister today. Such a trivial discrepancy. Such a small thing. His architect's mind, accustomed to noticing when measurements were even slightly off, couldn't dismiss it. Why would she lie about something so inconsequential? Walter wiped away another tear with the back of his weathered hand. 40 years of marriage, 6 months to live, and suddenly a foundation he'd thought unshakable felt dangerously unstable. A soft knock at the front door pulled him from his thoughts. He straightened his shoulders, folded the medical papers with architectural precision, and tucked them into his desk drawer. Whatever was happening, he would face it with the same methodical care he'd applied to every building he'd ever designed. The man who'd constructed award-winning structures that would outlast him by centuries wouldn't crumble at the first sign of structural weakness, not even when that weakness appeared in the life he'd spent decades building. Walter wiped his eyes with the monogrammed handkerchief Eleanor had given him on their 30th anniversary, the embroidered WD now blurry through tears. With practiced determination, he straightened his posture, resuming the professional composure that had earned him respect throughout his architectural career. The grandfather clock chimed 3. Eleanor wouldn't be home for hours yet, not from her charity lunch that suddenly felt like a fabrication. And his hand hesitated only briefly before reaching for the hidden compartment he'd designed into his desk during construction, a small drawer that slid open with architect's precision. Inside lay their household files, organized with the same meticulous attention he gave blueprints. The phone bills sat in chronological order. Walter's fingers, still strong despite his illness, leafed through them until patterns emerged, recurring Tuesday calls to an unfamiliar number, each precisely timed to Eleanor's charity meetings. His mind immediately connected dots with the same precision that had once mapped support beams. Tuesdays, he murmured, voice hollow in the empty study. Always Tuesdays. He moved to the kitchen, needing coffee to clear his head. The granite counters he'd installed himself gleamed in afternoon light, their perfection mocking the increasingly messy emotions churning inside him. Eleanor's expensive perfume lingered faintly from breakfast, now carrying undertones he'd never detected before, deceit perhaps, or simply his imagination. The coffee machine hummed, a rhythm that had once meant comfort. Walter's mind cataloged changes in Eleanor's behavior, new clothes appearing without mention, decreased physical affection, late-night whispered calls. He recalled her recoiling slightly when he'd reached for her hand after last week's doctor visit. At the time, he'd attributed it to her distress over his prognosis. Now he wondered. His hand trembled as he dialed the first 3 digits of Victoria's number, Eleanor's closest friend who might know something, before hanging up. Exposing suspicions meant making them real. Not yet, not without evidence. The refrigerator hummed in the silence, the wedding photo magnet watching accusingly as Walter set down his untouched coffee and moved to Eleanor's desk in the corner. The drawer slid open smoothly, revealing neatly arranged stationery and receipts. Between them, a hotel lunch bill dated the previous Tuesday, marked "personal" in Eleanor's handwriting. His hand shook so severely the receipt fluttered to the floor like autumn leaves. Walter stared at it, architectural memory flashing to 20 years prior, designing that hotel's atrium, winning awards for its innovative use of natural light. Eleanor had been so proud at the ceremony, her arm linked through his as cameras flashed. Walter's reflection fragmented in the stainless steel refrigerator door, his gaunt cheek evidence of the cancer consuming him from within. Unconsciously, his hand moved to cover it before his shoulders squared with quiet dignity. 40 years, he whispered into the empty kitchen, each syllable weighted with disbelief. The coffee grew cold, untouched. Walter gathered the evidence with the same careful precision he'd once used for building specifications. His architect's mind, trained to see how components fit together, now assembled a structure he never wanted to build, a case for betrayal. A car engine hummed in the driveway. Walter quickly returned the receipt to its place, closed the drawer, and picked up his coffee mug. The kitchen timer dinged with ironic timing, marking the end of certainty as surely as it had counted down countless meals shared across 4 decades. His heart raced, but his face composed itself into the calm mask of the renowned architect. Now he would observe Eleanor with new eyes, watching for structural weaknesses in the foundation he'd believed unshakable. How well, he wondered, positioning himself at the kitchen table, do I actually know the woman I've loved for 40 years? Walter returned home early from his chemotherapy treatment, the nausea and bone-deep exhaustion forcing an unplanned departure. He'd hoped for Eleanor's comfort, a cool cloth for his forehead, perhaps, or simply her presence beside him as he weathered the treatment's aftermath. The irony of still yearning for her care despite growing suspicions wasn't lost on him. He parked his car quietly in the side driveway, noticing an unfamiliar luxury sedan parked discreetly down the street. His architect's memory for detail, trained through decades of ensuring every measurement was precise, instantly registered that it didn't belong in their neighborhood of carefully selected vehicles. A Bentley Continental, new model, charcoal gray. Walter made note of it with automatic precision. The side door opened with his custom key, the one he'd designed with a slightly asymmetrical pattern that pleased his aesthetic sense. His steps were unsteady from the treatment, but determination kept him silent as he entered the home he'd built with his own hands, now feeling oddly like an intruder. Male laughter drifted down from upstairs, rich and confident. Walter froze at the foot of the staircase he'd designed with hidden support beams to eliminate creaking. His heart hammered against his ribs, but the methodical part of his mind, the part that had made him a celebrated architect, took control. Evidence. He needed evidence before conclusions. He climbed the stairs with careful precision, placing each foot exactly where he knew the boards wouldn't betray his presence. Even weakened by cancer and treatment, his knowledge of this house was absolute. He'd created every inch of it, after all. At the top landing, Walter paused, catching his breath. The master bedroom door stood partially open, an unfamiliar jacket draped over the leather chair Eleanor had insisted they purchase last year, an expensive designer brand she'd often admired in magazines. Voices filtered through the gap, intimate and relaxed. "How much longer do you think?" A man's voice, smooth and cultured. Eleanor's laugh, a sound Walter once treasured, sent ice through his veins. "The doctors say 6 months, but he looks worse every day. That cancer's eating him alive." "And the mansion?" The man again, pragmatic. "We'll sell it, of course." Eleanor's tone was dismissive. "It's worth about $1.5 million. I never liked it anyway. Too many reminders of him everywhere." His precious craftsmanship. The mockery in her voice was unmistakable. "That fat man disgusts me now, Thomas. The weight he's lost, the way he shuffles around. I can barely stand to look at him." Walter's medication bottle slipped from suddenly numb fingers, pills scattering silently across the plush carpet. His hand shot out to steady himself against the wall, the wedding ring he'd worn for 40 years catching light from the hallway sconce. "He still has no idea?" Thomas asked, amused. "None. Still planning everything to make sure I'm taken care of after he's gone." "So considerate." Eleanor's laughter held no warmth. "As if I haven't been planning this for years." Walter backed away, each step precisely placed despite the trembling in his legs. His silhouette moved across the hallway wall, hand clutching his chest as if physically wounded. The wedding portrait hanging in the hallway seemed to watch him with new eyes, witnessing the death of something more fundamental than his physical body. He retreated to his workshop in the garage, the sanctuary where he'd spent countless hours creating with his hands. The familiar scent of sawdust grounded him amid emotional chaos. His tools lay arranged in perfect order, the system he'd refined over decades. On the workbench sat a half-finished wooden jewelry box, intended as an anniversary gift, Eleanor's initials partially carved into the lid. The first tear fell silently, landing on the unfinished wood, darkening the grain he'd selected specifically for her. Then another, and another, tracking down his hollowed cheeks as he stared at the life he'd built, the life that had apparently been a calculated facade. Through the workshop window, he could see the mansion rising elegantly against the afternoon sky, every line and angle a testament to his skill and vision. His masterpiece. Her prison, apparently. Walter picked up a chisel, its weight familiar in his hand. He carefully, deliberately returned it to its exact place in the toolbox. An architect understood structural integrity. When foundations failed, controlled demolition was the only safe response. His gaze hardened as he stared at his life's work through the window, tears still streaming. "By tomorrow," he whispered to the empty workshop, "everything will change, and she'll never see it coming." His hand reached for the blueprint drawer with newfound resolve. The man who had designed award-winning structures that would outlast him by centuries knew exactly how to dismantle one without leaving a trace. Walter arrived at attorney James Cohen's private office at precisely 7:30 a.m., 15 minutes before the official opening time. The early meeting had been arranged with a single phone call. 40 years of friendship requiring little explanation beyond, "I need to see you. It's urgent." Walter's voice, rough from a sleepless night, had been enough to clear James's schedule. He carried a leather portfolio under his arm, evidence organized with architectural precision. Phone records, receipts, calendar discrepancies, and handwritten notes of overheard conversations. The weight of the portfolio was nothing compared to the heaviness in his chest. James rose from behind his desk as Walter entered, concern evident in his eyes. "Walter, I was going to call about your prognosis." He stopped mid-sentence, registering Walter's expression. The sympathy for a dying man transformed instantly into the professional focus of a longtime attorney. "This isn't about the cancer, is it?" "No," Walter replied, placing the portfolio precisely in the center of James's desk. "It's about Eleanor." James's office surrounded them with leather-bound law books lining walnut shelves, creating a fortress of legality that matched Walter's need for structure. Morning sunlight filtered through vertical blinds, casting ladder-like shadows across the evidence portfolio. The wall displayed framed law degrees beside architectural awards. Their careers had risen in parallel, each man respecting the other's expertise. For 90 minutes, Walter methodically presented his evidence, voice steady despite red-rimmed eyes. James's shock confirmed that the betrayal's magnitude extended beyond normal marital disputes. When Walter described overhearing Eleanor and Thomas discussing his impending death, James's hand formed a fist on the polished desk. "What do you want to do?" James asked finally, the question of a friend and attorney both. Walter's response came without hesitation, a plan formed during night hours when sleep eluded him, controlled demolition. What followed was executed with the same thorough precision Walter applied to architectural projects. Documents were prepared for the strategic sale of the mansion. Ironically, to Eleanor's friend, Victoria, whose admiration for the house had always seemed genuine. Assets were liquidated systematically, financial structures dismantled and reconstructed with new supports. "She gets the legal minimum," Walter instructed, as James drafted documents. Nothing that would allow contestation, but not a penny more. Walter signed papers with a steady hand, his wedding ring catching light as he slid the final document across the desk. He paused, studying the gold band that had symbolized commitment for 4 decades. With deliberate movements, he removed it and placed it centered precisely on the signed transfer of ownership. "What about the rest?" James asked, indicating the substantial remaining funds. "I've been thinking about a foundation," Walter replied, pulling a preliminary sketch from his portfolio. "For people betrayed by partners during terminal illness, something that would continue after I'm gone." James nodded, understanding blooming in his eyes. "Not revenge, legacy." Exactly. Walter's architect's precision was evident in every detail of the preliminary framework: organizational structure, mission parameters, leadership requirements. Even facing betrayal and death, his mind created rather than destroyed. By early afternoon, Walter returned home while Eleanor attended her charity meeting. The irony wasn't lost on him as he packed a single suitcase with methodical efficiency. Only personal mementos made the cut: his father's carpentry tools, family photos carefully edited to remove Eleanor, architectural awards representing decades of creation. He moved through the mansion room by room, conducting a final assessment with professional detachment. His hand trailed along walls he'd designed, crown molding he'd hand-selected, the staircase whose measurements he'd calculated to the millimeter. Each space held memories now recontextualized through Betrayal's lens, anniversary dinners in the dining room he'd specifically oriented to catch evening light, Christmas mornings by the fireplace whose proportions he'd personally adjusted 3 times during construction. In the master bedroom, Walter placed a single sheet of paper centered precisely on Eleanor's pillow. The printer's ink was stark against the Egyptian cotton she'd insisted upon. "I heard everything yesterday. Goodbye, Eleanor." No recriminations, no emotional outbursts. Just architectural precision in 7 words that dismantled 40 years. As Walter carried his suitcase to the car, Victoria's Lexus drove past, slowing as she recognized him. She waved, a friendly gesture from the woman who would soon own his masterpiece. The realtor's comments echoed in his mind. A wealthy widow, interested in the property, practically gushing about the craftsmanship. A brief, satisfied smile crossed Walter's face for the first time since his diagnosis. "If only she knew who really owned her new home," he murmured, placing his suitcase in the trunk with careful precision. He took one final look at the mansion, the physical manifestation of his life's work. But an architect understood that buildings, no matter how beautiful, were ultimately just structures. What mattered was their purpose, and his had just fundamentally changed. With the same methodical care he'd applied to every blueprint he'd ever drafted, Walter Davis drove away from the life he'd built toward one he would design anew with whatever time remained. Walter's key turned in the lock of apartment 3B, the mechanism cheap and imprecise compared to the custom hardware he'd installed throughout his mansion. The door swung open with a protesting creak, revealing his new home, a small 1-bedroom unit in a neighborhood that his former social circle would never visit. The stark contrast physically overwhelmed him despite his emotional resolve. Water stains marred the ceiling in patterns that his architect's eye automatically assessed for structural concerns. A single window overlooked a busy street, traffic noise filtering through thin glass that needed resealing. The bare walls awaited purpose, their off-white paint applied unevenly years ago. Walter placed his suitcase on the laminate flooring, the sound echoing in the empty space. At 68, after a lifetime of achievement, he stood in a room that contained nothing of his former status. Just a bare mattress on the floor, a folding chair, and a milk crate serving as a nightstand. With methodical precision, born from decades of professional discipline, he unpacked his minimal possessions. His father's carpentry tools were arranged in perfect order on the windowsill, the worn handles catching afternoon light. The single-family photo, now with Eleanor carefully removed, took its place on the milk crate beside his neatly ordered medication bottles. Walter sat on the edge of the mattress, his tall frame looking incongruous in such humble surroundings. He pulled blank paper from his suitcase and attempted to sketch new designs, a habit that had always centered him during difficult times. His pencil hovered over the page, trembled, then produced only fragmented lines before he crumpled the paper with uncharacteristic messiness. Hours passed. The room darkened. And Walter remained motionless on the bare mattress, staring at the water stains on the ceiling, professionally analyzing the likely roof defects while emotionally sinking into depths he'd never experienced. His terminal diagnosis report lay beside him, medical terms stark against the white paper. Metastatic. Terminal. Palliative care only. 6 months, he whispered to the empty room. 6 months of life remaining, and he'd just abandoned the achievements of 40 years. His architectural reputation would outlive him through his buildings, but without Eleanor, even the Eleanor who had betrayed him, who would remember the man who created them. Tears fell silently onto the medical report, blurring the timeline that suddenly seemed meaningless. There was no legacy now, no continuation of self, just an empty room, a dying body, and buildings that would eventually be demolished despite their current grandeur. Walter calculated remaining months against practical needs with clinical detachment. His funds would last decades, but his body wouldn't see summer. The recognition that he might die alone in this anonymous room, with no one to mark his passing, pressed against his chest with physical weight. Night fell completely. Unable to sleep, Walter approached the window during the darkest hours, gazing at the street below. Across the way, light still burned in a storefront with a faded Community Health Clinic sign. Through the windows, he could see a man in a white coat examining a young child, the doctor's hands moving with gentle precision despite the late hour. There was something in that careful attention that resonated with Walter's architectural sensibility, the same dedicated focus he had given to every building detail this man gave to his patient. Purpose existed in that small, underfunded clinic that had never existed in his mansion's perfect proportions. Morning brought pale sunlight and renewed determination. Walter showered in the bathroom with its dripping faucet and cracked tile, dressed in clothes that hung loosely on his cancer-thinned frame, and walked across the street to the clinic. "Do you need a handyman?" he asked the harried receptionist, noting the flickering fluorescent lights, the cabinet door hanging from one hinge, the waiting room chairs with uneven legs. "I'm good with my hands." The woman eyed him skeptically, but pointed to a mop in the corner. "We can't pay much." Walter nodded, taking the mop with the same hands that had once sketched buildings worth millions. As he worked, he noticed everything. The children's crayon drawings, brightening institutional walls. The organized chaos of genuine community service, the way patients were treated with dignity despite humble surroundings. By afternoon, he had fixed 2 light fixtures, stabilized 3 chairs, and reorganized the supply closet with architectural efficiency. The staff noticed, exchanging curious glances at the quiet, dignified older man who clearly possessed skills beyond janitorial work. "Those cabinets you fixed," a voice said behind him as Walter adjusted a door hinge. "That's architectural work, not handyman repairs." Walter turned to find a man watching him with intelligent, assessing eyes. His white coat identified him as Dr. Miguel Vasquez, the physician Walter had observed through the window. "I'm Miguel," he said, extending his hand. "And those aren't maintenance man's hands. What's a man with architect hands doing mopping floors in my clinic?" Walter hesitated. Years of professional confidence momentarily abandoned in the shame of his fall from success. Then something in Miguel's direct gaze, respect without judgment, caused him to square his shoulders with quiet dignity and extend his hand. "I'm Walter," he replied simply. "I used to be an architect." In the pause that followed, Walter felt something shift. Not a complete rebuilding, but perhaps the first placement of a new foundation stone. In this unlikely place, with his identity stripped to its essence, he had been seen not for his achievements or status, but for the skills embedded in his hands. Ever had your world shattered overnight? Share your turning point below, like if this hits home. Follow to see how Walter transforms betrayal into purpose with his remaining days. Can a dying man create meaning from life's cruelest moment? Walter arrived at the clinic 30 minutes early each morning, despite the increasing effort it required. His body was betraying him more visibly now, the weight continuing to fall from his frame, his breathing more labored with each passing week. Yet he found unexpected satisfaction in applying his architectural precision to the clinic's many broken elements. Today he knelt before a cabinet, carefully adjusting hinges that had suffered years of neglect. His hands, though thinner, still possessed the steadiness and skill developed over a lifetime of creating structures meant to last generations. There was comfort in fixing things, in restoring function and order to spaces that helped others. "Walter, you've reorganized the entire supply system," Patricia Wong, the 71-year-old clinic administrator, observed with appreciation. "I can actually find bandages without a treasure map now." He smiled slightly, noting how she'd used his filing system exactly as he'd designed it. "Just applying basic principles," he replied, though they both knew his work went far beyond basic. His architectural training had transformed the clinic's chaotic storage into an intuitive system that even the most harried staff could navigate. The morning progressed with Walter moving methodically through his self-assigned tasks. His oxygen tank now accompanied him, a necessary companion as his lungs weakened, but he designed a small cart for it that allowed mobility while keeping his hands free for work. During his lunch break, Walter sat quietly in the back corner of the waiting room, observing rather than participating in staff conversations. It was here, 3 weeks into his volunteer work, that he first noticed the woman. Middle-aged, perhaps early 60s, with the poised posture of someone accustomed to commanding classroom attention. She sat with dignity despite obvious distress, clutching a medical bill with trembling fingers. "Ms. Chen needs to discuss payment options," Patricia murmured, following Walter's gaze. "Husband left her for his secretary last year, emptied their accounts. She's a retired teacher fighting breast cancer with no insurance since he canceled their policy. Third case like that I've seen this month." Walter watched as Dr. Vasquez escorted the woman to his office, noting the compassion in the doctor's manner. Later, as Walter repaired a flickering light in the hallway, he overheard fragments of their conversation through the partially open door. "I understand financial concerns, Ms. Chen, but delaying treatment isn't an option," Miguel was saying. "There are programs." "I've applied to everything," she replied, voice steady despite obvious fear. "The house is already mortgaged to pay for the first round. There's nothing left, Dr. Vasquez." Walter continued his work, but his mind, trained to see patterns in architectural plans, began connecting dots across different cases he'd observed at the clinic. Women, primarily older, facing illness while also managing the aftermath of betrayal. Their financial security stripped away at precisely the moment their health demanded resources. That evening, Walter attended the clinic's support group meeting for the first time, sitting quietly in the back with his oxygen tank. 6 women shared stories with painful similarities. Partnerships dissolved during vulnerability, financial security vanishing, healthcare becoming an impossible luxury. Sophia Chen spoke last, her teacher's articulation making her story all the more devastating. 32 years of marriage, she said without self-pity. He waited until the diagnosis to tell me he'd been planning to leave for years, said he couldn't be expected to be a caretaker, took everything except my teaching certificates on the wall. The next morning found Walter in the clinic's maintenance closet, which he'd converted into a makeshift workshop. With his breathing increasingly labored, he sketched initial designs for something beyond cabinets or lighting fixtures. The foundation concept emerged as he worked on the clinic's broken heating system, the metaphor of fixing structural problems inspiring a larger mission. "What's this?" Miguel asked, discovering Walter's detailed drawings during a rare break. Walter hesitated before answering. A structure for addressing systemic vulnerability, for people like Sophia Chen. Miguel studied the organizational flowchart with a physician's analytical eye. "This is more than a building design. It's a foundation," Walter acknowledged, "for people betrayed by partners during illness, using my resources to create something that continues after I'm gone." The doctor's gaze sharpened. "Your resources must be substantial for something this comprehensive." Walter simply nodded, unwilling to elaborate on his former life. His attention turned back to the heating system, effectively ending the conversation. But the seed had been planted, both in Miguel's awareness and in Walter's sense of purpose. 2 days later, Walter watched from across the street as Sophia Chen received an envelope containing funds for her treatment. Her disbelieving hands trembled, mirroring his own emotion as he observed from a distance. The architectural precision of his anonymous giving plan had worked perfectly, the envelope appearing as financial assistance from a clinic support program, no connection to the quiet maintenance volunteer traceable. That evening, Walter caught his gaunt reflection in the clinic bathroom mirror, barely recognizing his physical self. The cancer was winning its battle against his body, his frame now skeletal where it had once been robust. Yet the determined eyes staring back at him remained unchanged despite illness's progression. His professional identity, his capacity to design and build, remained intact even as mortality approached. In his apartment later that night, Walter unfolded a newspaper, scanning headlines until he found what he sought. A small article about Eleanor Davis facing investigation for financial irregularities in her real estate practice. The photo showed her leaving a courthouse, Thomas conspicuously absent from her side. Walter began to crumple the paper in momentary satisfaction before smoothing it out with architect's care for materials. On the reverse side, he continued drafting the foundation mission statement, transforming destruction into construction. As his oxygen tank hissed quietly beside him, Walter's trembling hands sketched with increasing detail. His architectural mind now designed something more enduring than buildings, a structure to help others rebuild lives shattered by betrayal. In applying his professional skills to this new purpose, he found the tears that came were different from those shed in his first days of discovery. These were tears of purpose, of knowing that his pain might prevent others from similar suffering. Even as his body failed him, his architect's vision extended beyond his limited remaining time. Walter's foundation was taking shape, not in steel and concrete, but in systems and support. Not a monument to his own achievements, but a scaffold for others to rebuild. Not revenge against Eleanor, but resurrection of meaning from the ashes of betrayal. Walter paused outside the clinic's staff entrance, hand resting on the doorknob. Through the frosted glass, he could hear Marina, the head nurse, speaking with Miguel. "I'm just saying it's strange," she insisted. "He shows up out of nowhere, clearly educated, clearly once wealthy. What's his real story? For all we know, he could be running from something." Walter's fingers tightened on the handle, architectural precision already calculating his silent departure. After Eleanor's betrayal, the thought of being discussed, analyzed behind his back, sent a cold wave through his chest. "Walter?" Miguel's voice came from behind him, in the parking lot. "You're early today." Walter turned slowly, oxygen tank cart squeaking on the pavement. "I was just leaving, actually." Miguel's eyes narrowed, taking in Walter's position at the door, the tension in his shoulders. Understanding dawned immediately. "You heard, Marina. You're leaving because she asked who you really are." He stepped closer, voice lowering. "So why don't you tell me instead?" Walter hesitated, architectural mind calculating risks of truth versus benefits of connection. The clinic had become his purpose, his final project. Leaving meant abandoning the foundation concept, abandoning Sophia and the others he'd begun to help anonymously. "Could we talk somewhere else?" Walter finally asked. 20 minutes later, they sat on Miguel's modest apartment balcony, the city spread below them. Walter noted how the small space had been creatively maximized. Potted plants climbing trellises to create privacy, furniture arranged to optimize the limited square footage. Even in modest circumstances, good design mattered. "Terminal pancreatic cancer," Walter began, opting for the simplest truth first. 6 months was the initial prognosis. That's down to maybe 3 now. Miguel nodded, professional enough not to offer false hope. "I suspected something serious. The weight loss, the oxygen. I want to help others before I die," Walter continued carefully. "Your clinic gives me that opportunity. That's not the whole story." Miguel's directness was refreshing after years of Eleanor's carefully constructed deceptions. Walter's gaze moved across the city skyline, identifying buildings he'd designed in his former life. "No, it's not." As twilight deepened into night, Walter revealed more: his architectural career, his marriage, Eleanor's betrayal discovered in his final months. He explained his strategic withdrawal, the sale of his mansion, his disappearance from his former life. His voice broke when describing overhearing Eleanor and Thomas discussing his death, the first time he'd spoken the betrayal aloud, making it newly real. 40 years, Walter said, handkerchief pressed briefly to his eyes. "Everything I built for us, for her." Miguel's response surprised him. "I understand more than you might think." The doctor's story emerged gradually. His wife Anna's diagnosis with aggressive leukemia 5 years earlier. The devastating medical costs that insurance wouldn't cover. Their savings depleted, second mortgage taken. "When she died, I lost everything, her, our home, my private practice. I ended up here, starting over at 53. Walter noted the faded photograph of Miguel's wife on the side table, the 2 wedding rings the doctor wore on a chain around his neck. Understanding passed between them, 2 men who had lost different lives but found themselves rebuilding from similar ruins. "The foundation you're designing," Miguel said finally, "that's what you're doing with your money from the mansion sale." Walter nodded. It needs a legal framework, proper structure. I'm running out of time to establish it properly. What will you call it? The question caught Walter off guard. I haven't decided. Are you ready for Eleanor to know what you've done with the money she wanted? Miguel's question cut to the heart of Walter's motivation. Is this about helping others or punishing her? Walter considered this, architect's mind examining the structural integrity of his own motivations. Initially, perhaps there was an element of satisfaction in knowing she wouldn't get what she expected, but now it's about creating something meaningful from this experience. Buildings eventually fall, but helping others rebuild their lives, that might outlast anything I've ever designed. Miguel studied him, then nodded slowly. I know some lawyers who specialize in nonprofit establishment, people who would help expedite the process, given your timeline. You'd help me with this? Walter asked, genuine surprise in his voice. Some structures are worth building together, Miguel replied simply, the construction metaphor bridging their professional worlds. Walter's eyes filled with tears as Miguel extended his hand to seal their agreement, the first genuine connection since Eleanor's betrayal, the first time he'd allowed himself to be truly vulnerable since discovering his life's foundation had been built on sand. They compared calloused hands side by side, one from building structures, one from healing bodies, a symbolic moment of recognition across different disciplines but shared experiences. In this unlikely friendship, Walter found something he'd thought permanently lost: trust. Has betrayal made you afraid to trust again? Comment your experience, like if you found friendship in unexpected places. Follow to see Walter's foundation rise from heartbreak. Will his legacy triumph over Eleanor's betrayal before time runs out? As they finalized plans for meeting with Miguel's legal contacts, Walter felt something shift in his understanding of legacy. Perhaps it wasn't about the buildings that would outlast him, or even the foundation itself, but about the connections forged in life's final chapter, connections built on authentic perception rather than deception. In choosing to trust again, despite complete betrayal, Walter demonstrated the resilience that had made him an exceptional architect. Some collapses cleared ground for rebuilding. Some endings created space for new beginnings. Some betrayals, paradoxically, opened paths to deeper authenticity. The foundation would be his final design, but this friendship might be his most meaningful construction. The hospital room was not what Walter would have designed. The proportions were slightly off, the window placement inefficient for natural light, the bathroom door hinged on the wrong side for optimal flow. His architect's mind cataloged these flaws automatically, even as his body surrendered to the inevitable hospitalization he'd resisted for weeks. You should have come in sooner, Miguel chided gently, reviewing Walter's chart at the foot of the bed. Though not officially his physician, Miguel's medical privileges at County General allowed him to monitor Walter's care. Too much to finish, Walter replied, his voice weaker but determination unchanged. Against medical advice, Walter had transformed his hospital bed into a workstation. Foundation documents spread across the blanket in perfect organizational systems, each section arranged with architectural precision despite his physical weakness. The window offered a view of the clinic across the street where he'd found purpose, the connection symbolically important to him. The Restoration Foundation, Walter said, indicating the header on the documents, helping people rebuild lives after betrayal during illness. Miguel reviewed the papers with professional appreciation. You've thought of everything: financial assistance structures, counseling programs, legal advocacy, housing support. It's comprehensive. An architect considers all elements of a structure, Walter replied, the effort of speaking evident. His gaunt face had hollowed further, skin stretched tight over cheekbones, but his eyes remained sharp and focused. Nothing left to chance. The foundation paperwork represented Walter's final project, his legacy distilled into systems and supports rather than beams and columns. His architectural precision was evident in every detail. Organizational flowcharts, leadership succession plans, financial distribution mechanisms, even facing death, his mind created with impeccable attention to structural integrity. "You should rest," Miguel suggested, noting Walter's increased oxygen requirement. Walter shook his head slightly. 3 weeks at most, he said, naming his remaining time with the same matter-of-fact tone he once used for building completion estimates. "Need to finish this first." Later that afternoon, as Walter rested, the television news captured his attention. A report featured Eleanor Davis leaving a courthouse, her usual poised expression replaced with visible strain. The financial irregularities in her real estate practice had expanded into a full investigation, with several clients alleging fraud. The report noted that her business partner, Thomas Reed, had severed ties with her firm, his statement distancing himself from any knowledge of improprieties. Walter watched without satisfaction, feeling vindication but no joy in her suffering. His focus remained on construction rather than destruction, on building his foundation rather than witnessing her downfall. He turned the volume down and returned to his documents, making notations with trembling but precise hands. In the hallway outside his room, a conversation occurred beyond his hearing. Miguel spoke with Walter's oncologist, their expressions solemn. "Days rather than weeks," the oncologist said quietly, shaking his head. "The cancer has accelerated." "His determination is remarkable, but physically—" Miguel nodded, accepting the medical reality his colleague presented. Through the doorway, they could see Walter reviewing foundation plans, unaware of this timeline reduction, his architectural mind refusing to acknowledge what medical expertise recognized clearly. "He's finishing something important," Miguel explained. "Let's support that as long as possible." That evening, an unexpected visitor arrived at Walter's room. Sophia Chen stood hesitantly in the doorway, holding foundation paperwork in her hands, her teacher's analytical mind having connected dots across seemingly separate environments. "Mr. Davis?" she asked tentatively. Walter looked up, recognition and caution mingling in his expression. "I received assistance for my treatments," she continued, entering slowly, "from a new program at the clinic. But when I asked to volunteer with the foundation behind it, I was given organizational documents to review." She held up the papers, architectural elements in the design clearly visible. "These organizational systems match structures I used to teach in my architecture appreciation classes for high school seniors." She stepped closer, recognition dawning more fully. "I remember featuring your mansion in our Masters of Modern Design unit years ago. You're Walter Davis, the architect who disappeared." Walter's hands stilled on his documents, the choice to deny or confirm hovering between them. "The anonymous donations," Sophia continued, her teacher's methodical mind assembling evidence. "The clinic volunteer with architect's hands. The foundation structure with your design principles embedded throughout." Her voice softened. "You're the one who's been helping all of us, aren't you?" The silence stretched between them, broken only by the soft hiss of oxygen and distant hospital sounds. Finally, Walter nodded once, the simple acknowledgement of truth. "Why?" Sophia asked, the question encompassing everything: his anonymity, his generosity, his presence in this hospital far from his former prestigious life. "Because some collapses create opportunity for rebuilding," Walter replied. the architect's perspective applied to human experience rather than physical structures. Sophia moved closer to the bed, studying the foundation documents with a teacher's thoroughness. This is remarkable work. The organizational design alone is exceptional. She looked up, meeting his gaze directly. But who will implement it when you're... She stopped, realizing the implication of her question. When I'm gone, Walter finished for her, practical about his mortality. That's the piece I haven't solved. Miguel will handle legal aspects, but the foundation needs someone who understands both organizational systems and personal experience with betrayal during illness. Their eyes met in silent communication, the question unasked but hovering between them. I was a teacher for 30 years, Sophia said finally. Administrative organization was my specialty, and I certainly understand the mission personally. Walter studied her with an architect's assessing eye, measuring capability rather than materials. The foundation will need a director who can build on its initial structure, someone who sees both systematic and human elements. The conversation continued as sunset cast golden light through the window, illuminating the foundation documents spread across the bed. In this quiet exchange between architect and teacher, between benefactor and recipient, a transfer of vision began, not just of organizational systems, but of purpose that transcended individual experience. Walter's trembling signature appeared on additional foundation documents that evening, tears smudging ink as he completed his life's final project. With architectural precision, he positioned Sophia Chen to become the foundation's first director, ensuring his design would continue beyond his physical presence. Outside in the hallway, Miguel observed this transition with medical understanding of life's final phase. The doctor recognized something essential. Walter wasn't just creating an organization. He was constructing meaning from devastation, building legacy from betrayal, designing continuation beyond death. The foundation was taking form, not in steel and concrete, but in human connection and shared purpose. Walter's architectural vision would continue beyond his physical presence, structural integrity guaranteed through proper planning and careful selection of those who would carry it forward. As night fell, Walter rested against his pillows, exhaustion evident but satisfaction in his eyes. Through the window, lights blinked on across the city skyline, several buildings of his design visible in the distance, but his gaze remained on the foundation documents now organized in perfect folders. His true final creation, the legacy that would outlast even his most enduring structures. Morning light filtered through the hospital window, casting gentle patterns across Walter's bed. His breathing had grown more labored overnight, the oxygen levels increased to maximum. Yet his mind remained clear, focused on the foundation documents now perfectly organized in leather portfolios beside him. Sophia Chen arrived early, her teacher's punctuality evident as she entered precisely at the visiting hour. She carried a small portfolio of her own, opening it carefully on the adjustable table across Walter's bed. "I found something I thought you should see," she said, removing a faded course packet. "From my Architecture Appreciation Class, 2005. Walter's eyes, sunken but still sharp, focused on the material. There, prominently featured in Masters of Modern Design, was a professional photograph of his mansion accompanied by architectural commentary and student discussion questions. "I used to tell my students that true architecture reveals the soul of its creator," Sophia continued, turning pages to show student essays about his work. "Every year, they wrote about the harmony in your designs, the attention to human experience within technical precision." Her finger traced the mansion's distinctive roof line in the photograph. "The same principles I recognized in the foundation organizational structure. Walter's gaunt hand reached out, touching the coarse materials with wonder. While buildings had been his career's focus, this evidence of influencing young minds represented an unexpected dimension of his legacy. "There's something else," Sophia said more hesitantly. "I knew your wife, Eleanor." Walter's expression shifted, question evident despite his weakened state. "She was a guest speaker in our Career Day program," Sophia explained. "Real estate and property investment. She used your home in her presentation materials, described living in an architectural masterpiece." Sophia paused. "She seemed so proud then." "People change," Walter whispered, voice barely audible above the oxygen flow. "Yes," Sophia agreed, her own experience with betrayal evident in her tone. "But what we build from that change, that's what matters." She placed the foundation binder on the table, open to the director's responsibilities section. "I've reviewed everything. If you're certain you want me to carry this forward." Walter nodded once, decisively. With trembling hands, he signed the final authorization documents, officially appointing Sophia Chen as the Restoration Foundation's first director. His architectural vision would continue through her teacher's implementation, a perfect structural partnership across disciplines. Miguel arrived during this exchange, medical assessment immediately noting Walter's deterioration. Yet he recognized something equally important in the architect's expression: peace. The foundation was secured, the legacy established, the purpose fulfilled. Throughout the day, Walter drifted in and out of consciousness, his body surrendering while his mind completed its final designs. During one clear moment, he beckoned Miguel closer. "Thank you," Walter whispered, "for seeing the architect, not just the maintenance man." "And thank you," Miguel replied, "for showing me that rebuilding is always possible." The afternoon brought a gentle spring breeze through the partially opened window, carrying distant sounds of the clinic where Walter had found his final purpose. Sophia arranged foundation documents in the precise organizational system he had designed, while Miguel adjusted the oxygen that no longer provided much relief. Walter's breathing grew increasingly shallow, his architect's mind completing its final assessment. The foundation was structurally sound. The leadership succession established, the funding secured, the mission clear. Every element of his final design had been executed with the same precision he had once given to award-winning buildings. A sense of completion settled over him, not the bitter satisfaction of denying Eleanor his fortune, but the profound peace of creating meaning from devastation. In his final architectural achievement, Walter had transformed personal betrayal into societal benefit, individual pain into collective support. As sunset painted the hospital room in golden light, Walter Davis took his final breath, the spring breeze lifting the curtain in what seemed a symbolic release. Miguel and Sophia stood on either side of his bed, witnesses to the peaceful completion of a life that had found its ultimate purpose in its final chapter. 3 days later, in the downtown office of James Cohen, attorney at law, the full scope of Walter's legacy was revealed. Eleanor Davis sat stiffly in a client chair, her expression expectant despite recent legal troubles. The summons to her former husband's will reading had suggested financial resolution to her mounting problems. James Cohen's professional demeanor revealed nothing as he produced the final documents Walter had signed weeks earlier. Mr. Davis left specific instructions regarding his estate. Eleanor leaned forward slightly, anticipation evident. The mansion at 1847 Lakeside Drive was sold prior to his death, James began, watching recognition dawn in Eleanor's eyes. The proceeds, along with all other assets, have been transferred to the Restoration Foundation, a nonprofit organization dedicated to supporting people betrayed by partners during terminal illness. Eleanor's face drained of color. "That's not possible. I'm his wife." "You received the legal minimum required by state law," James continued impassively. "The foundation documentation is ironclad, I assure you. Mr. Davis was quite thorough in his arrangements." Through the office window, Eleanor could see the foundation headquarters being established in the building across the street. The architectural elements of Walter's design were subtly evident in the signage and entrance, his final creation taking physical form even as his fortune slipped permanently from her grasp. 1 year later, the Restoration Foundation celebrated its first anniversary of operation. The headquarters, modest but beautifully designed, featured a small plaque in the lobby dedicating the space to those who rebuild after betrayal. Sophia Chen's office contained a single photograph, not of Walter himself, but of one of his architectural designs clipped from a newspaper article. Under Sophia's leadership, the foundation had already assisted dozens of people facing situations similar to Walter's, providing financial support, legal guidance, and practical assistance during their most vulnerable moments. Miguel Vasquez served on the Medical Advisory Board, his expertise ensuring the Foundation's health support programs maintained excellence. In the corner of Sophia's office stood a small architectural model, a precise miniature of the Foundation headquarters, designed by Walter during his final weeks. Inside the model, visible only when viewed from a specific angle, was a tiny handwritten note in architect's precise script. "Some structures outlast their builders. Some foundations create more than buildings." Eleanor Davis never contested the will. Her legal troubles eventually resulted in loss of her real estate license, her professional reputation destroyed by the same patterns of deception that had characterized her personal life. Thomas Reed, who had abandoned her when scandal broke, established a competing firm across town, completing her isolation. Walter's architectural legacy continued through both his physical buildings and the foundation that bore his design principles throughout its organizational structure. But perhaps his most meaningful legacy existed in the lives touched by his final creation, people who, like him, found purpose and rebuilding after betrayal's devastation. In transforming his personal tragedy into social benefit, Walter Davis had designed something more enduring than even his most celebrated buildings, proof that from life's most painful collapses, new and stronger structures could rise. The architect's final design had been his most masterful, a foundation built not of concrete and steel, but of compassion and vision. Not a monument to his own achievements, but a support system for others rebuilding. Not a testimony to what he had lost, but a legacy of what he had ultimately found. Purpose that transcended betrayal, meaning that defied death, and impact that would continue long after his final blueprint was complete.